May 31st, 1942, 8 p.m, the calm, deceptive waters of Sydney Harbour. The night was cool, clear, and seemingly quiet, the familiar, comforting silence of a great city at war, yet a city that believed itself safely detached from the carnage. The glow of the wartime blackouts, a hazy orange filter across the metropolis, still provided enough light to reflect off the gentle swells. On the deck of the depot ship, HMAS Kuttabul, moored peacefully at Garden Island, leading seaman Bill Jones was finishing his late watch, his mind perhaps on a beer waiting on shore, or a letter from home. He looked out at the massive, reassuring steel arc of the harbour bridge, a symbol of Australian permanence, and felt the familiar, comforting rhythm of the naval base. The war felt distant, fought in the deserts of North Africa and the treacherous jungles of New Guinea. No one in Sydney Spree, from the highest general to the newest sailor, truly believed the Imperial Japanese Army or Navy could ever reach the heart of the Commonwealth. This comforting illusion, however, was about to be violently shattered. Beneath that deceptively calm surface, moving with unnerving, purpose-driven silence, 3 deadly metal fish were slipping through the darkness. They were the Type A Kohyoteki, miniature, 2-man Japanese midget submarines, each a technological marvel of the time, packed with 2 powerful Type 97 torpedoes. Their mission, designated Operation M, was audacious, almost suicidal in its tactical execution: penetrate the heavily fortified, supposedly impenetrable heart of the enemy's naval base and sink the largest Allied warships they could find, causing a shockwave of terror across the Australian continent and forcing a strategic diversion of Allied resources away from the primary combat zones. These midget submarines were the lethal tip of a terrifying spear, launched hours earlier from the massive mothership submarines, the I-22, I-24 and I-27, patiently waiting miles offshore in the open Pacific. The strategic calculation behind the raid was cold and simple. By mid-1942, the Japanese war machine, though checked at the Coral Sea, still held immense initiative. The goal was not a full-scale invasion, which the Japanese knew was logistically impossible at the time, but psychological devastation. The capture of Port Moresby remained the ultimate objective, and the presence of major Allied warships, particularly the American heavy cruiser USS Chicago, the Australian light cruiser HMAS Adelaide, and several escort destroyers, anchored in Sydney, represented a critical obstacle. By striking Sydney, the Japanese aimed to demonstrate the vulnerability of the Australian mainland, forcing Prime Minister John Curtin to demand that the entire Royal Australian Navy, RAN, be retained for local defence, thereby weakening the crucial campaigns to the north. The Type A Kohyoteki midget submarine was Japan's answer to this high-stakes raid. It was a weapon of desperation and technological ambition. Each vessel, barely 78 feet long, 23.9 metres, was meticulously engineered to minimise its acoustic and magnetic signature, powered by silent electric batteries for the infiltration phase. The 2-man crew operated in cramped, windowless confines, navigating solely by gyroscope and depth gauge, entirely dependent on the discipline of the pilot and the navigator, men who had trained for months knowing the only acceptable outcome was success or death. Sydney's defences, while extensive on paper, were riddled with critical flaws. The harbour's primary protection against subsurface threats was the anti-submarine boom net, a massive barrier of steel cables and floats intended to stretch across the main channel near South Head. This net was supposed to be the absolute physical impossibility for any enemy vessel, yet in the rush of wartime construction, the net was still unfinished. Crucially, a gap existed near the eastern side of the channel, left temporarily open for the passage of Allied ships. This dangerous secret, a flaw of only 400 feet, was the Achilles heel that the Japanese reconnaissance, likely operating from a mothership submarine days earlier, had identified and targeted. The first attempt to exploit this flaw came at approximately 8:01 p.m. A Japanese midget submarine, later confirmed to be the M14, launched from the I-27, made a fatal navigational error, or perhaps misjudged the current. Instead of slipping through the open gap, the submarine snagged its bow hydroplanes on the western, supposedly secure sector of the boom net. The metallic stress and the slight disturbance of the water were enough to draw attention. The first alarm came not from sophisticated sonar, but from an ordinary vigilant Australian sailor. The watch crew on the patrol boat HMAS Kuttabul, noting a strange disturbance, immediately raised the alarm, a panicked signal that was initially met with disbelief by the higher echelons of the Aran command. The auxiliary patrol boat HMAS Yandra rushed to the net. Her commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander F.H. Walker, could barely process the frantic reports of something metallic caught in the net. Walker and his crew used their spotlight, confirming the dark, unmistakable silhouette of the submarine. This was not a drill. This was not a misplaced log. This was the war, finally brought to Australia's secure doorstep. Walker immediately signalled a full alarm and began circling the trapped M14, attempting to snag the intruder with a grapnel. The action was chaotic and unprofessional by the standards of open-sea warfare, but it was immediate and resolute. The crew of the M14, Sub-Lieutenant Katsuhisa Ban and Petty Officer Mamoru Ashibe, were now fighting for their lives, trying to free their vessel from the metallic mesh. They were partially successful, but the grappling and circling bought precious hours for the Australian crews to confirm the unimaginable threat and prepare a response. The first silent killer was trapped, but the naval forces were only just beginning to realise that the threat was not singular. The confusion that initially plagued the Australian command quickly gave way to a desperate, chaotic, but determined response. Lieutenant Commander Walker, aboard the HMAS Yandra, was now fully committed to neutralising the trapped intruder. For over an hour, Walker and his men fought a silent, tense battle against the entangled M14, eventually resorting to dropping 4 hastily prepared depth charges. The detonations, small, muffled thunderclaps that shocked the relative peace of the harbour, failed to immediately destroy the sub but ensured it remained pinned and unable to escape. This initial engagement, though clumsy, confirmed the enemy's presence and galvanized the entire naval defense structure. The real battle, however, was unfolding within the inner harbour, where the 2 unhindered midget submarines were actively hunting. The harbour defences were desperately trying to catch up to the reality of the threat. Patrol boats, launches, and ferries, many crewed by young reservists and weekend sailors, were scrambling, their sonar operators straining to distinguish the enemy's acoustic signature from the noise of the city and the turbulence of the water. M27, launched from the I-22, was the next to be sighted. At approximately 10:52 p.m, the submarine was spotted by the watchful eyes of HMAS Zara, a small, auxiliary patrol boat. The midget submarine, struggling to navigate the intricate, cluttered inner harbour environment, was quickly forced into a corner. The small anti-submarine vessel HMAS Lolita arrived on the scene, its commander, Lieutenant Jock Shug, taking decisive action. He ordered his crew to begin raining down depth charges, assisted shortly thereafter by the HMAS Macleay. Imagine the scene within the close confines of Taylor's Bay, a dark, enclosed space. Normally the picture of urban tranquility, now erupting with the thundering violence of naval combat. The depth charges created massive, geyser-like explosions that threw columns of water hundreds of feet into the air, shaking the entire port and terrifying the thousands of Australian and American sailors and civilians trying to sleep nearby. The continuous, mind-numbing boom, boom, boom of the explosions, echoing off the towering structure of the harbour bridge and the city skyline, made it terrifyingly clear that this was no mere drill or accidental fire. This was a concentrated, deadly attack on the Australian mainland. Inside the M27, the situation for Lieutenant Keiyu Matsuo and Petty Officer Masao Tsuzuku would have been unbearable. The continuous pounding of the depth charges, designed to crush a conventional submarine hull, would have turned their confined metal space into a metallic drum of agony, filled with the stench of leaking battery acid and the fear of imminent implosion. The pressure proved too much. Severely damaged and disoriented, the M27 was eventually forced to the surface near Taylor's Bay. Commander Matsuo and his crewmen realized their mission was impossible, and their escape routes were sealed. In a final, desperate act of commitment to the Code of Bushido, they chose ritualistic suicide over the shame of capture. They fired scuttling charges to destroy their own vessel, silencing it forever. The muffled underwater explosion was the final sound of M27's life. The second intruder was officially sunk, but it was during this prolonged, chaotic, and loud hunting of M14 and M27 that the third and most dangerous midget submarine, M24, launched from the I-24, executed its penetration with chilling effectiveness. Commanded by Lieutenant Kenshi Chuman, M24 had slipped entirely undetected past the inner harbour patrols and proceeded toward the main Allied moorings near Garden Island. Chuman, hearing the muffled chaos of the depth charge attacks, would have used the confusion as a perfect acoustic screen. His focus remained laser-sharp on his primary target, the massive, tempting silhouette of the American heavy cruiser USS Chicago, the pride of the American fleet in the Pacific. Chuman had his target in sight, the element of surprise still partially his, and the stage was set for the tragic climactic blow that would shock a nation. It was shortly after 12:30 a.m. on the morning of June 1st that Lieutenant Kenshi Chuman, commanding M24, made his final, critical maneuver. He had successfully avoided the chaotic anti-submarine efforts targeting his two sister ships and had navigated his small vessel into the tight firing position he needed, directly targeting the massive hull of the USS Chicago. The moment was the culmination of months of secret planning and a desperate, hours-long infiltration. The air inside M24 would have been thick with the humidity of confined spaces, broken only by the whirring of the gyroscopes and the loud, chilling hiss of the torpedo tubes opening. Chuman released his first torpedo. The weapon, a powerful Type 97 oxygen-fueled torpedo, sped through the dark water, its wake a fleeting white line quickly swallowed by the turbulence of the harbour. But whether due to the hurried aiming, the turbulence created by the earlier depth charge attacks that had racked the harbour, or a slight, fatal error in the submarine's trim, the torpedo missed its primary target, the USS Chicago. It skimmed dangerously close underneath the American cruiser, whose crew, alerted by the nearby explosions, had already moved to battle stations. The torpedo continued its deadly, high-speed, and now tragically errant course. Its trajectory carried it directly toward the shore of Garden Island, where it struck the thick stone seawall with a deafening, cataclysmic force. The explosion occurred right below the mooring position of the HMAS Kuttabul. The Kuttabul was not a warship. She was an innocuous ferry, hastily converted into a basic depot ship serving as a floating barracks for Allied sailors waiting for new assignments. When the torpedo struck the seawall, the resulting massive underwater detonation funneled its force directly upwards. The shockwave was enough to lift the Kuttabul violently out of the water before she buckled, broke apart, and sank almost instantaneously in less than 5 minutes. The structure, never designed to withstand an attack, was reduced to splintered timber and twisted metal. The tragic reality was immediate and devastating. 21 Allied sailors were killed, 19 members of the Royal Australian Navy, RAN, and 2 members of the Royal Navy, RN. The attack had failed to sink a major warship, but it had exacted a heavy human cost, bringing the reality of the Pacific War home with a terrifying, bloody finality that Sydney could no longer ignore. The explosion that sank the Kuttabul, far louder and more devastating than the depth charges, was the event that snapped the higher levels of the Australian command fully out of their shock. The naval officer in charge, Commodore J. W. A. Waller, ordered the harbour sealed immediately. All remaining ferry traffic was halted, and all available anti-submarine ships, including the corvettes HMAS Lithgow and HMAS Goulburn, were dispatched to begin a systematic and methodical sweep of the inner harbour. The ensuing hours were a frantic, desperate, all-night hunt for the final intruder. The Australian crews, initially clumsy, but now fueled by shock and rage over the loss of their comrades on the Kuttabul, methodically swept the harbour with sonar and spotlights. They dropped depth charges wherever a sonar ping or a suspicious ripple was sighted, turning the once peaceful waters into a deadly underwater minefield for the trapped submarine. The sailors, many of whom were reservists or young conscripts, performed with professionalism and grim, unforgiving determination. They had successfully locked down the entire naval base and refused to allow the M24 to slip away. Lieutenant Chuman and the crew of M24, having delivered their blow, were now caught in a relentless, unforgiving trap. With the harbour sealed, patrol boats swarming, and depth charges continuously detonating, there was simply no way out. The small, electric batteries of the midget submarine were designed for a short, aggressive mission, not an extended evasive ordeal. Their oxygen was running low, and their chances of survival was zero. The chaotic, relentless counterattack launched by the Australian crews, a fightback that unfolded overnight, had successfully caged the final predator. As the sun rose on the morning of June 1st, 1942, painting the sky over the city in hues of uncertain dawn, a chilling and undeniable reality greeted the astonished citizens of Sydney. The war was no longer an abstract concept or a distant headline. The physical, tragic wreckage of the HMAS Kuttabul was visible near Garden Island, a sober, painful testament to the night's violence and the sacrifice of 21 Allied lives. But by the morning light, the Australian naval crews, exhausted but defiant, could confirm their tactical triumph. All 3 Japanese midget submarines had been accounted for, sunk or destroyed within the confines of Sydney Harbour. The immediate relief was tempered by the lingering anxiety over the last vessel. 2 of the submarines, M14 and M27, were quickly located and their tragic final moments confirmed by recovery teams. But the final submarine, the M24 commanded by Lieutenant Schumann, the one that had successfully fired its torpedo and sunk the Kuttabul, remained missing, its precise location unknown due to the rapid, chaotic and widespread deployment of depth charges. The entire harbour was now a priority search area, its waters crawling with patrol boats and divers. It took several days of intense searching before the M24 was eventually located on June 3rd, resting on the seabed near the entrance to Middlehead. Inside, the bodies of Lieutenant Kenshi Schumann and his crewman, Petty Officer Takeshi Omori, were recovered. The submarine's final, poignant revelation was that the crew had died not from Australian firepower, but by their own hand. Like the crew of M27, Schumann and Omori had chosen to detonate their scuttling charges when they realised capture was inevitable. Their final act a testament to the Bushido Code and their failure to return to the mothership, the Australian authorities, recognising the extreme courage and commitment of the submariners, retrieved the bodies and, in a remarkable gesture of respect and wartime chivalry, gave them a full military funeral with full honours. This unexpected gesture made headlines around the world, recognising the humanity behind the enemy uniform. The military and political response to the attack was immediate and transformative. The national embarrassment of the initial security lapse was quickly converted into resolute action and a massive, urgent expenditure of resources. Within days, the incomplete anti-submarine net was completed and reinforced, and additional permanent naval defences, including new hydrophone detection systems, fortified gun emplacements, and reorganised patrol routes, were rapidly installed. Sydney Harbour was never successfully penetrated again for the rest of the war. The attack served as the ultimate, violent catalyst for Australia to harden its defences against the threat from the sea. The story of the Sydney Harbour attack is more than just a footnote in naval history. It is a critical microcosm of Australia's wartime journey. It was a terrifying moment of shock, a chilling demonstration of national vulnerability, and a tragic loss of 21 lives. But ultimately, it was a profound demonstration of national resilience and rapid adaptation. Within hours of the surprise attack, the country's naval crews, operating under unimaginable pressure and chaos, had hunted down and destroyed every single intruder. They restored the security of their most vital port and proved that the war would not be fought on Australia's terms of surrender, but on its own terms of defiant, rapid, and decisive response. The attack failed in its strategic goal, but it succeeded in leaving a powerful legacy. The night Sydney Harbour became a battleground, and the morning the nation fought back with unbreakable resolve. If you found the shocking audacity of this attack and the incredible Australian response fascinating, then do yourself a favour and subscribe. We release new documentaries every week, uncovering the untold moments that shaped the Pacific War, and I want to know your thoughts. If you had been on one of the Allied warships in Sydney Harbour that night, which part of the battle, the chaos of the depth charges, or the silent, deadly success of the midget submarines, do you think would have been the most terrifying? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.